Yes, would you ask Mr. Crawford to come back, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Crawford.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, before we restart Mr. Crawford's evidence,
Yes.
can I just make a short procedural announcement subject to you and Ms. Estefan, and that is the next pair of witnesses. After Mr. Crawford's evidence today, we will move then to Mr. Reck, and we will finish him during the course of tomorrow and then move back to Mr. Soames, who has very kindly indicated that he wishes to return to complete his evidence. And that will be the rest of tomorrow and Thursday.
Yes.
And possibly beyond that, but we will see.
Good.
So
Yes.
that's the programme. So
Thank you very much.
knows.
Yes, well,
Mr. Crawford, can I ask you to be shown again, please, HAR 00003869, which was what we were looking at before, before the break, where you have a stamp B on the specification notes on the 26th of January 2015. See that?
Yes.
And I just want to look with you, please, now at the glazing P2 panels, which we looked at briefly before. And you can see there that Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation is prescribed as the core for the P2 panels, yes?
Yes.
Did you ever discuss the use of Kingspan TP10 within the external wall build-up with anybody within Studio E?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever raise the issue or question with Harley or Ryden about the use of TP10 rigid insulation within P2?
Not that I recall.
Had you actually ever heard of the product Kingspan TP10 before?
I'm aware of various Kingspan installations. Specifically that one at that time, I can say.
Did you take any steps to familiarise yourself with Kingspan TP10 and its specification?
I may have done, I don't recall, but I would reiterate what I said at the start, which I was commenting from architectural intent perspective.
Right. Now, the P1 and P2 panels were part of the external surface of the building, weren't they?
They were part of the window units.
They were. Let's see if you agree with my next question. Do you agree with me that the insulating material used within those panels should have been a material of limited combustibility in order to comply with paragraph 12.7 of approved document B, or else be the subject of an 8414 test to comply with BR 135 criteria?
To comply to those criteria, yes.
Yes. Now, looking at, if we can, RYD 000-46822, please, page 1 of that, 46822. This is revision D of the Harley specification notes. This time you see against the D in the bottom box, 15th of July 2015, R2 and R3 added fire. And you stamp this with status A. Can you see that? On the 17th of
Yes.
July, just a day or two later. See that?
Yes.
Do you accept, well, let me put it to you this way. Did when you stamped it A, did you notice that the specification for P1 was styrofoam and P2 was Kingspan TP10?
As stated before, I was looking at the spec and the drawings from the perspective of architectural intent.
Yes. Did you notice that the specification for the material for P1 for the core was styrofoam and the material for P2 for the material was Kingspan TP10?
I don't recall.
If those were not, if you had not satisfied yourself, well, let me ask this: did you take any steps to satisfy yourself that styrofoam and Kingspan TP10 were materials of limited combustibility, or else had confirmed?
My understanding of all foams, plastic foams, is that it could be treated with retardant to limit their combustibility.
did you take any steps to find out whether those materials had in fact been treated with retardant to limit their combustibility?
I don't recall.
If those materials were neither compliant with the requirements for limited combustibility, nor had passed a full-scale 8414 test in accordance with BRE 135, how could their specification conform to design intent as you had specified it, or you had stamped it?
The architectural intent had a performance criteria within it, which they were required, which Harley were required to conform to, and so whatever their proposals they put forward were required to conform to that. It's not an issue of sorry.
I'm sorry, do you want to finish your answer? I overspoke. Do you want to finish that answer?
No, that's fine.
All right. How could a drawing or a specification conform to design intent if it didn't comply with the statutory requirements?
It had to comply with employers' requirements in terms of checking that it complied with statutory requirements. That was for the subcontractor to seek to ensure that they complied with statutory requirements.
How could a drawing or a specification be signed off as complying with design intent, or architectural intent if you like, if in fact it did not comply with statutory requirements?
But we were only looking at it from the purposes of architectural intent. The means of satisfying statutory compliance was for the subcontractor to satisfy themselves. They had a performance specification which they were required to meet. We were not checking, we're not marking, we're not giving marks out of 10, we're not approving. We're commenting on architectural intent.
Yes, and really my question is, and I'll ask it one more time, did you think at the time, when marking this status A conforms to design intent, that in doing so you didn't have to satisfy yourself, either that Styrofoam or that Kingspan TP10 complied with the statutory requirements?
I thought that was for Harley to satisfy themselves.
You thought that was for Harley. Did you take any steps to satisfy yourself that Harley had satisfied themselves that those materials complied with the statutory requirements?
Those for them to satisfy themselves.
Did you know generally at the time that Styrofoam was expanded polystyrene?
XPS.
XPS, indeed.
I think I mentioned before XPS. I'm familiar with XPS. XPS is used in external aspects of buildings with retardant in it.
So would it not have been obvious to you when you saw the word Styrofoam on this document as the material for the core in the P1 panel, that it was, being XPS, manifestly not compliant with statutory requirements?
Not at all, not necessarily. It could have retardant in it. It was part of the windows, so it wasn't part of the cladding, and it could have been encapsulated. So
when you saw Styrofoam, are you telling us that you actually made the assumption?
I made no judgment on it for the reasons I've already mentioned.
Right. So if, in fact, you didn't know whether or not any fire retardant had been added to the Styrofoam, would it not be a manifest error to any architect to see Styrofoam sitting there in the specification for use in the external wall construction as it was?
I think I've answered the question.
Well, I don't think you have, if you don't mind. Would you mind answering it again, then?
Can you repeat it, please?
Yes. If you didn't know whether or not a fire retardant had been added to the Styrofoam, wouldn't it be a manifest error to any architect who sees Styrofoam sitting there in this spec for use in the external wall construction as it was?
Not if you believed it was the responsibility of the subcontractor to ensure that it was compliant, then you'd assume that they'd exercise that duty.
And you say it wasn't your job to check.
As stated already, we were looking at the drawings for the purposes of architectural intent. We don't mark them, we don't grade them, don't approve them.
Now I'm going to turn to a totally different topic, Mr. Crawford, building control. And I'm going to ask you some questions about your interaction with RBKC building control. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I may sometimes use the shorthand BC or BCB as building control or building control body. If I do, I mean the same people. Just taking a step back for a moment, in terms of your own personal experience, at the time of your involvement in the Grenfell Tower project, so 2014, summer of 2014 to 2016, did you have personal, professional experience of preparing and submitting full plans applications?
I would have done in past projects.
Yes, and would you agree that doing that is standard work for an architect?
Yes.
Now, turning to the requirements of the building regulations, do you agree with me that the level of detail in a full plans application should be sufficient at least to allow a building control person, whether it's inside the council or an approved inspector, to be able to assess whether the proposed works would comply with the building regulations?
In general terms, yes.
Yes. And would you agree with me that it's good practice to make a full plans application before any work commences on site?
That's the normal process.
And would you agree with me that a completion certificate issued by a building control body doesn't conclusively prove that the building regulations have been complied with?
Well, that'd be a matter of interpretation.
Interpretation of what?
If it didn't imply that, then it would be a worthless certificate.
Yes. Now, as a designer, you would have to check for yourself, wouldn't you, whether or not the completion certificate was comported with the building regulations?
In order to issue a completion certificate, you need to have the building control approval.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I don't want to take time showing you the regulations, but can I take it that you were familiar at the time with Regulation 17.1 and 17.4 of the building regulations? We can look at the text if you like.
Yeah, show me the text.
Okay, if you go please to BMER 0000001, page 23. That's 6 zeros. There it is. Now there's Regulation 17, completion certificates, and let's look at 1. A local authority shall, within the specified period, give a completion certificate in all cases, including a case under 17A, where they are satisfied after taking all reasonable steps that following completion of the building work carried out on it, a building complies with the relevant provisions. And then sub-regulation 4, which is on the next page, page 4, if we can just have that up, please. It says, a certificate given in accordance with this regulation shall be evidence, but not conclusive evidence, that the requirements specified in the certificate have been complied with. So you were familiar with that at the time, were you?
In general terms, yes.
Yes. Okay. Were you aware of Regulation 38 of the building regulations at the time of the Grenfell Tower project?
I don't think specifically.
Okay, well, let's look at the page 23, same document. If you go to page 24, I said 23, in fact it's 24, Regulation 38, fire safety information. You see that? And if we look together, please, at sub-regulation 2, the person carrying out the work shall give fire safety information to the responsible person not later than the date of completion of the work or the date of occupation of the building or extension, whichever is the earlier. You see that? You see that?
Yes.
Was that something you were familiar with at the time of your involvement in the project?
Not specifically, no.
Not specifically. Right. Can I just ask you then about RBKC's building control itself? You, I think, had worked with RBKC's building control department on the Calc project.
Yes.
And what was your impression of RBKC, your general impression of RBKC's building control department before you started working with them on the Grenfell project?
I think on the Calc project, the preference of the main contractor would have been to have gone with approved inspector, and however they were left without the option, as they were required to use RBKC's building control. However, in the process of getting the completion certificate for the academy, I think the main contractor worked with the building control and were able to make the relationship successful. I think my view would probably be the same. I'd rather have an improved inspector than have used RBKC building control.
Right. And had you been required to deal with fire safety issues as part of the Calc project?
When you say deal with, I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, had you had any involvement in fire safety issues as part of the Calc project?
Well, yes.
And what were those?
Well, for example, the fire strategy drawings.
Yeah. And did you, in that capacity, liaise with RBKC Control over those fire safety issues on Calc?
Yes.
Who was the person primarily that you liaised with at RBKC?
It was John and Paul, as I recall.
So the same individuals,
Same team.
John Hoban and Paul Hanson.
Yes.
Now let's look at your statement, please. I'd like you to go to page 66 and look at paragraph 206. You say there's, I think, go to the beginning of the paragraph at page 65, where we can start paragraph off. You say, towards the start of my involvement in the project, I recall meeting John Hoban, Building Control, with Simon O'Connor Ryden on site. And then you say that may have been during the week commencing 25th of August 2014. I remember that John was very clear about how he wanted information issued, you say, and that such he was specifically and primarily concerned with fire-related matters, wanted a basic set of information so that he could, request further information if he required it. And then he says, or you say, he says he often stressed that he was supposed to oversee several hundreds of projects. However, I also had experienced him to be very diligent. For example, I noted that on the Calc project he had, quotes, crawled into almost every conceivable cavity possible with a torch, unquote, during the several weeks of fire-stopping checks. Did his diligent approach on Calc include, to your recollection, his approach to fire safety issues?
I think with the two separate officers working on the project, they had quite a clear split, at least in their minds, in terms of which parts of the building regulations they dealt with. So, for example, Paul Hanson dealt with B1 and B5. I think they call it means of escape group. And Paul Hanson was the main point of contact as the surveyor. I think he called himself building officer surveyor or something like this. My experience is that Paul Hansen had more fire experience than John.
And the split you just talked about, you say Paul Hansen dealt with B1 and B5. What did John Hoban deal with?
2, 3, and 4.
So B2, B3, and B4, so including
But
external fire.
Yes, he'd also deal with 1 and 5 as a point of contact.
Right, I see. So when he was very diligent, crawling into almost every conceivable cavity possible with a torch, you say in your statement that he was doing several weeks of fire stopping checks.
Yes.
Is that B3? His role on B3?
It would be, yes.
Yes, I see. Now,
I think that quote has been used, it's been taken from an email,
it has.
if I recall.
We saw it this morning, in fact, but I didn't take you to that part of it. It's one of the run of emails at the end of March we saw when there was discussion about cavity barriers and fire stopping.
Yes,
You'll
and I was
recall that.
using it to try and push forward
Yeah.
the notion that,
Indeed.
yeah.
Now, can I ask you, please, to be shown SEA 000-11560. This is an email from you on the 2nd of September 2014 to Simon Lawrence and others, including Paul Hansen. And you say, Simon, Paul is a fire engineer and best placed to answer questions regarding the dry riser and AOVs. John Hoban won't be able to provide any answers on his own and tends to refer to Paul all the time, which can be frustrating when you want answers. And then you provide the contact details for Paul Hansen. Was it your impression at the time, looking at this email, that John Hoban was not experienced with fire safety matters?
I don't want to say something that would be unfair, but I think it's true to say that Paul Hansen, I think, was ex-London Fire Brigade, and he had contacts in LFB, and so was very well informed on fire-related matters. And so when it came to, in this specific instance, something fairly, well, as was particularly specialist, the mechanical AOV system, he would be far more likely to be able to comment in an informed way than John.
Yes, I mean, you point out in this email that Paul is a fire engineer. Did you have any view about whether Mr. Hoban was a fire engineer, or are you drawing a distinction in their qualifications? Between one and the other?
It would be for them to see what their qualifications were, but as stated, I'm not even sure if fire engineer is correct, but I understood Paul to be ex-London Fire Brigade,
and
so he had, let's say, a level of understanding that I understood to be fairly high for someone in that position.
Now, you say in this email that John Hoban won't be able to provide any answers on his own and tends to refer to Paul all the time. Was that true in your experience of him in respect of B2, 3 and 4 issues, which you say fell on his side of the divide?
No. I think if the questions were tricky, I mean, perhaps I wrote this email out of a certain amount of frustration off the back of something else, I don't know. But, I mean, it would be unfair to say that,
Right. Your view at the time, I think, as you say in your statement, was that dealing with him was somewhat frustrating.
Well, I think that's what it says there.
It says
in that
it
email.
there. It says it there as well. Yes. Was that limited to fire safety issues, or was that your general impression of his way of going about things?
He had his own way of doing things.
Right. Just help me with this. You say that he would be given to referring issues to Paul Hansen rather than dealing with them himself, and that was frustrating. But also you found him very diligent, as you say in your statement.
I think he's somebody who meant well, and he did try to do the right thing. But for example, we had scenarios on calc that repeated themselves on the tower where, for example, in service riser cupboards, there's only a requirement to fire stop at the floor, not the enclosure, and you'd insist on doing both, which became frustrating.
I see.
So there wasn't that he didn't mean well, it's just that his interpretation could be frustrating for people.
Right. We can see in the statement, the paragraph 206 that I've just shown you, that you refer to the email where he's quoted as saying that he crawled into cavities during fire stopping checks on calc. Did he ever do anything similar on site at Grenfell, do you recall?
He may have done, but in a sense, John had, as I understood it, John had scheduled visits to inspect the works as they progressed, and that he was going to use those as a means of satisfying himself that things were being done and being done in a compliant fashion. But those visits were done in liaising with Simon Lawrence and his team, and so they were not. I was not involved in or brought into those visits.
Right. So you weren't at the site visits where he might or might not have crawled into cavities with the torch?
Correct.
I see. You say that in your statement, we can go back to it if you want to, that he was supposed to oversee several hundreds of projects, what you say in your statement. Did you get the impression that Mr. Hoban was overstretched?
I got the sense that he had the tendency to exaggerate.
Exaggerate. Exaggerate what sort of things?
Numbers.
Numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers of what?
Projects he's overseeing.
I see. Did you think that he was overseeing hundreds of projects at the same time?
No.
Right.
I suspected he was very busy,
So
as we all are in the construction industry, but he wouldn't. He'd make sure you knew that.
Was it your experience that RBKC could drag their feet about things when asked?
Well, certainly the planning side did.
Yes, let's look at your statement. Page 66, paragraph 207, just below where we were looking at before. You say there, from fairly early in my involvement in the project, I flagged to Ryden the importance of sitting down with building control to eliminate the risk that building control would disagree with design decisions that had been made and require late changes to the design.
Yes.
And then you say, in September 2014, I suggested reconsidering the fire strategy plans in light of revised drawings, albeit this was a process subject to a settled decision on the layout of the lower floors. And then you identified the importance of early liaison with building control there. But if you look at an email, SEA 000117007, which is the one you refer to in the body of paragraph 207, do you see? If we go to that email, you see there it's from you to Simon Lawrence, 18th of September 2014, and you have some attachments to that. Simon, not sure if you're aware of these building control preliminary observations that were made at the end of last year, attached. They raise a number of concerns in relation to additional doors, specification, fire ratings, venting. They will also have ironmongery implications. Based on our experience at Calc, where the process dragged on over a long period, I'm keen to sit with John and Paul and go through these issues and clarify them all in order to eliminate risk. So I don't think I need the last sentence with you, because my question is, you can see that he refers to the process dragging on over a long period in relation to Calc. Does that tell us that your experience, at least as at September 14, was that RBKC could be slow, could drag their feet over things?
Yeah, I think that the general process, yes.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you some questions about your liaison with building control. Shortly after you started working on the Grenfell Tower project, Studio E submitted the full plans application to building control. We know that. And that happened on, well, the application was sent in on the 4th of August by Mr. Soanes. Can we look at that? It's RYD 000143378. it says, "Dear John, further to your email last Tuesday, please see attached the completed full plans application form for Grenfell Tower, hard copy and drawings to follow." You see that?
Yes.
How had you and Mr. Soames decided to divide up the labour on the full plans application, or were you not involved in it at all at that point?
I think at this point I wasn't involved.
You don't think you were involved at this
No.
point? I see. Did Mr. Soames discuss the full plans application or the proposed full plans application with you when you came into the project?
I don't recall what was discussed.
Right. Do you know whether any record was kept of what was sent to Building Control by Studio E as part of the full plans application?
Yes.
There was a record. And, yes. And would you agree that on large projects like Grenfell Tower, it's common for information and drawings to be supplied to Building Control as the project proceeds?
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, that's what happened with Grenfell, isn't it?
That's correct.
Did you keep a tracker of which drawings and information was being submitted to Building Control and when?
I personally didn't keep a track.
You personally didn't. Did anybody?
I don't know whether, well, my assumption is Building Control, in order to satisfy themselves that they were signing stuff off, would have kept their own tracker.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, Mr. Crawford, but I'm asking really about Studio E.
We didn't keep a tracker.
You didn't keep a tracker.
No.
Do you know why that is?
We weren't required to, weren't asked to.
You weren't required to or weren't asked to. Did you have any other method other than a tracker of keeping track of which drawings and documents were being submitted from time to Building Control by Studio E?
I think they were kept in. Some of the stuff was kept on file in consult out folder, and some was kept in emails.
You say some of the stuff was kept on file, and I'm afraid the transcriber's not picked up what you then said. Some in emails.
Yeah.
So some on files, some in emails. So, and how was it organised within Studio E, this material?
Well, what happened was that, and I think this is covered in my witness statement, I talk about John being very categoric about what he wanted and not wanting to be flooded with information at the start. So we issued him a pack of drawings that broadly in line with what he'd requested, or what we understood he'd requested. We sent them these to him, and then he his instructions were that he would satisfy himself of Building Control compliance through his site visits and asking for information as and when he required it.
Yeah, but my question was, how was the material organised within Studio E? How did you keep a track internally within Studio E of what material you were sending to them?
We had a consult out folder with information in it.
I see. Now, looking at paragraph 206 of your witness statement again, we've just looked at it, and I scampered past the meeting that you say you had on the 25th of August. If we can just go back to that, it's the previous page at 65. The bottom of the page, you say there in the first line, I could recall meeting John Hoban on site. This may have been during the week commencing 25th of August 2014. You see that?
Yes.
And you say that you remember him being very clear about how he wanted the information issued. Now, did you have any drawings with you during that site visit? Do you remember?
Yes, I think I probably did.
Did John Hoban look at them?
I think he probably would have looked at them and taken them away.
You think he took them away?
Yeah.
Do you know which they were?
They'd have been the basic project drawings. I believe he was on site and had looked at drawings prior to me being there as well with Simon Lawrence.
All right, but I'm asking about your recollection. So do you have a recollection, do you, of meeting him on site on that day and showing him drawings which he then took away?
Yeah.
You say you thought they were the basic project drawings. Are those the employer's requirements drawings?
I don't recall. I just remember sitting and discussing the project.
Right. Do you remember whether by then you had seen any of the drawings that Harley were doing? Bearing in mind that Harley's first production of drawings was, I think, the 22nd of August.
Yeah, I suspect that to have been too early.
Too early, yes, all right. Now, you say at the meeting, if you go to the very foot of that page and then over to page 66, that he was very clear about how he wanted information issued such that he was specifically and primarily concerned with fire-related matters. You see that?
Yes.
You say he wanted a basic set of information so that he could then request further information if he required it, so that he was not overwhelmed with information.
Yes.
So in general terms, the idea was that he would get basic information, he could ask for more if he wanted it, and you would drip feed him as and when.
Yes.
I see. Is that how you worked with John Hoban on the CULT project?
In broad terms, yes, except the main contractor there, who would have done the role Ryden did, say, on site visits and so on. I believe they maintained a tracker.
Right. And did this conversation, was anybody else present at it? Or was it just you and Mr. Hoban together?
No, Simon Lawrence almost certainly would have been at that meeting.
Simon Lawrence would have been at the meeting. It was a formal meeting, was it? Or a...
Yeah, it was an initial introductory meeting.
Right. What about Simon O'Connor?
He may well have been, but I couldn't say definitively.
All right. Did you keep a note of this conversation at the time, or otherwise record it in writing?
I don't recall.
Did you, or have you looked for a note of this conversation?
I might have done within my sketchbooks.
Right. Okay. When he said he wanted a basic set of information, what did you understand that would comprise?
I understood that as sort of basic GAs, plans, sections, elevations, enough to give him an understanding of what was going on, give him an overview of the project.
Did it include details of the materials to be used within the building envelope, the new facade?
I can't remember without seeing precisely what was in the pack, to be honest.
Is there any reason to why you wouldn't have given him a basic set of information, including the details of the materials to be used in the facade?
No, except that obviously had a number of meetings with ourselves as studio, explaining the progress of the building up to then. But no, in answer to the question.
Did it occur to you at the time to bring specifically to his attention, as part of that basic set of information, the design, even though basic, of the facade at that time and the materials specified to be used within it?
I think he knew what they were already.
But did you say you think you did, was that a thought you had at the time?
It was my understanding from conversations with Bruce and the fact that Bruce had had meetings with them prior to my involvement.
Right, I see. So let me be clear, was this an assumption that you made, or was your understanding something that you had derived from a discussion you had with Mr. Soanes prior to meeting Mr. Hoban on site?
I'm not sure I can recollect in that level of precision.
Do you agree with me that if you were providing Mr. Hoban with a basic set of information that he wanted, you would have wanted to make sure he had the details of the materials to be used in the new facade?
I would want him to have an understanding of the project at that point in time, where it was, the basic build-ups, materials, yes.
Can I ask you to go to paragraph 40 of your statement, please, on page 17 of this same document? You say in paragraph 40 about halfway down, building control set its own agenda for checking off items, and it made clear to me I would be contacted should further information be required. Ryden's style was very much of dealing with issues directly, I believe for expediency, and because Ryden was efficient at doing so. To this end, my understanding is that I was not party to everything building control agreed on. And I just want to focus on the sentence that contains the word set its own agenda for checking off items. Is that a reference to your conversation that you had with John Hoban on site in the week of the 25th of August 2014?
Yes.
Right. Is it common in your experience, or was it common in your experience then, for building control to tell the contractor what they needed to see on a project?
Ultimately, building control has to satisfy itself that it's performed its duty, and building control itself would know what those things were.
Yes. Let me ask the question again. Is it common for building control to tell the contractor what they needed to see on a project, as opposed necessarily to the architect, the project architect?
Sorry, say that again?
Yes. Was it common in your experience for building control to tell the contractor what building control needed to see on a project, as opposed necessarily to the architect?
I think building control would speak to both. It depends on the contract, the type of project, the level of involvement, the type of, whether you're using building control, approved inspector. There's a lot of factors that can influence that.
Right. Perhaps a simpler question. Was the experience that you were having with John Hoban's approach an experience that you had with other building control inspectors on previous projects?
Not dissimilar.
Not dissimilar. Yeah. Do you agree that in relying on building control to tell you what information building control needs runs the risk that relevant information may well not be provided to them?
Well, it's a two-way process, and it was a two-way process in as much as you explain the scheme, explain how things work, give them a set of information, and then they're satisfying themselves against the building regs that they're satisfied that they've been met. They need to understand the project to be able to do that, and you do that with them. Right.
Well, let's see how we go. Let's turn, please, to RYD 000-16990. This is an email of the 3rd of September 2014, in which Simon Lawrence writes to John Hoban, copy to you and Bruce Soanes, as well as Simon O'Connor. Morning, John. You see that?
Yes.
And if you look at the second substantive paragraph down, it says this, Studio ERR Architects. You see that? Studio ERR Architects, lead designers who will forward all relevant drawings, etc., in the future. I believe you already know them from your work on the Calc project next door, so hopefully this will make things easier. I will ask them to arrange a meeting with yourself on site shortly. Now, looking at that, would you agree with me that that email suggests that the drawings had not yet formally been submitted by that time? And bearing in mind that this is the 3rd of September 2014, was that the case?
I can't remember. I know there was a delay in issuing them, which was agreed between Bruce and the KTCMO and Bruce and Simon Lawrence, because
Right.
the KCTMO were making changes, still in the process of making changes to the ground floor plans, and the idea was that the changes would be completed before the drawings were submitted to avoid confusion.
I see. If you go back then to SEA 000-11707, this is an email from you to Simon Lawrence of Ryden on the 18th of September 2014. You see that?
Yes.
And you attach some drawings or plans, and you say, Simon, not sure if you're aware of these building control preliminary observations that were made at the end of last year attached. See that?
Yes.
Based on our experience at Calc, where the process dragged on over a long period, etc. Now, we've seen this before. My question this time is a bit different. You were providing him with preliminary comments from building control that I think had been sent to you sorry, sent to you, yeah, sent to Studio E, perhaps not you,
Yeah,
9 months earlier, in
Yeah.
other words, at the end of 2013. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, they'd have been sent to Bruce at that point, I guess.
Exactly. Now, my question is, what had prompted you to send these to Simon Lawrence at that point?
Well, I was relatively new on the project. I was starting the project, and so I wanted to check how much he knew, I guess, is my interpretation of that.
Your interpretation of it?
But I'm trying to recall, obviously, writing the email and what it was in relation to.
Right.
So I'm sending them the preliminary observations that were made by building control to make sure that he was aware of them. Not that I necessarily would expect him not to be, but also because some of these items I was dealing with at the time, for example, the new doors to the lower levels and the ironmongery.
Before you sent this email, did it not occur to you to check with Bruce Soanes whether or not, in fact, those building control preliminary observations had already been sent to Ryden?
I may have done, I don't recall.
Right. Was it your impression at the time that Studio E had rather sat on these comments for 9 months before sending them on to Ryden, who by this time were your client?
Well, you're saying that, I don't know if that's the case. I think Bruce would have to comment on that. I think the situation is that I was getting involved in the project and I was just making sure that everyone was in the same place that I was. I mean, Simon, for example, may have known of more comments, or I don't know.
All right. Now, you say in the second substantive paragraph in that email that you wanted to sit down with
Building control. Yes. I said that in several emails.
You do. Do we take it that you were advising Ryden there that early liaison with building control was particularly important?
Yeah, I was just, I guess I was stressing the importance of getting the process moving.
Yes.
And to initiate that process and make it meaningful.
Yes. And is that partly because at this point, this was not early on in the project, construction had in fact already started by this point, hadn't it?
Well, it was early on the project for me. Construction had started,
Yeah.
but I don't know what pre-construction agreements there may or may not have been in place. That's between Ryden and
Right.
authorities.
I mean, it's fair to say that there was an element of urgency about this, wasn't there now?
Well, if you work in construction, there's always an element of urgency.
Right. Now, you say it was important to eliminate risk. Do you see at the end of
Yes.
the first sentence of the last paragraph? But is it right that you didn't seek any earlier engagement with building control on the facade? And I appreciate you only just come into the project, but I think at no time before that.
Let me just clarify what I meant by that statement first.
Yes, please.
This was me coming into the project. When I mean eliminate risk, I meant risk to programme, risk to Ryden being able to deliver everything on time. So the earlier you get them involved, the quicker you can get things signed off, the quicker things can be procured and built.
Right, I see. So this is project risk, not health and safety risk.
I mean, you could read it as all forms of risk, but I think it probably would have been referring to
Right.
project risk, given that it was addressed to Simon.
I'm sorry, I was about to interrupt you. Did you
No,
want
it's
to
fine.
finish?
Finish.
You provided a batch of drawings to building control a little bit later in September. If we go to RYD 000187442, please. You can see you did that on the 24th of September. This is an email from you to John Hoban, copy to Simon Lawrence, and you attach a zip file, building control set. Do you see that?
Yes.
Excuse me. And you say, John, following our conversation on site, whilst looking at the Academy on Tuesday, I am forwarding a pack of drawings for the Grenfell Tower project as mentioned. I believe yourself and Paul Hanson sat down earlier in the year and did an initial appraisal of the proposed layout changes to the lower levels with Bruce Soanes from our office. And then it goes on. I've included Paul's initial markups of the fire strategy from this time as well as a new set. which shows there's been some simplification to the arrangement on these floors. I know you like to go through the drawings on an agreed process of release rather than just being swamped with everything at once. So I'm just sending the following drawings to start with, and then you see them all listed there. I'm not going to read those out. I've read you the text of that. Had you discussed with Bruce Soanes which drawings would be sent to building control before you sent this email to Mr. Hoban?
I don't recall.
Right. How did you decide for yourself which drawings would be sent to building control if you hadn't discussed it with Mr. Soanes, given that this was reasonably early on in your involvement?
First of all, I may have done, but also I think at this point I'd already met John on site, and maybe I suspect he'd indicated what he expected to see.
Right. I see. And so we can see that the list is divided into three parts. Fire strategy drawings from previous meeting with Paul Hanson's markup. New fire strategy drawings showing modifications to the office area and emission on internal office stair. And then basic plan sections and elevations GA set.
Yes.
So the first two bullet points are to do with the podium, the lower part of the building. Or is that not right?
The fire strategy drawings generally through the whole building.
Right. Okay. Looking at, let's look at RYD 0001875, please. This is one of the drawings that you sent him. And if you look at the key on the top left-hand side, I'm afraid this is going to have to be pretty substantially expanded. I don't think anyone can read it, but if you and this may not work. Let me ask the question. Can you see, if you look at the key top left-hand side, it refers to a zinc spandrel panel as item 5.
I can see one saying aluminium.
It's not very clear, but if you look at, there's a key at the top which runs from 1 to, looks like 12. I'm afraid it is hard to read, and I'm sorry about that. But item 5 says zinc spandrel panel. Do you recall that?
I'm not sure I can see anything from this.
All right. I'm not surprised. Do you remember, then, there are other references to zinc in that list, were you aware that the drawing still had cladding panels labelled as zinc?
If these were from the employer's requirements set, yes, that's possibly the case.
Yes. But do you remember that by that stage, so late September 2014, ACM had now been agreed in principle by RBKC's planning department and had been since July or so, the only outstanding issue being the colour?
I think Bruce was definitely still holding on to the notion that we may use zinc as the finish, and the colour and the final planning had to be agreed, as I recall. I think these drawings showed zinc CM as opposed to ACM. It's effectively the same product.
These drawings didn't include any details of the insulation that was going to be used on the columns or behind the spandrel panels, did they?
Well, they wouldn't do as a GA drawing, no.
And they didn't include any details of the cavity barrier strategy that we see on the ER drawings.
They wouldn't this type of drawing, no.
And they were, I think, is this right? They were 1 in 100 and 1 in 50 drawings. So they were, as you say, general arrangements as opposed to detailed.
Yeah.
Is there any reason why you didn't provide building control at this stage with the most up-to-date drawings that you had?
Well, these drawings as I recall from the employer's requirements, at this point, Harley were working up the detailed drawings. So the idea was to give them the project overview
Yeah.
with plans, sections, elevations, fire strategy, give them the basic pack of information, and then as the detailed design package got developed by Harley, provide them with the information as that became available.
Right. If we go back to the email, RYD 000187442, can you confirm with me that the list you set out there is a selection of drawings? It isn't the entirety of the employer's requirement drawings that Studio E had prepared in 2013, was it?
Is it's basic plans and sections and the fire strategy drawings.
Right. Now, we know that you didn't provide the NBS specification to, well, we can see that in this email. Why is that?
Because he asked for a basic set of drawings.
Yes.
And the final choice of materials, for example, in the cladding and build-up, were to be confirmed with the detailed designs that came from Harley.
Is there any reason why... Well, let me ask it this way. Did it occur to you that it might be a good idea at the time to send Mr. Hoban the NBS specification so that he could at least see the basis on which Ryden had won the tender and I emphasise, be dividing up its work packages and instructing its subcontractors on?
I'm not sure. They may have had the Stage E report and they may have had the NBS spec from Bruce prior to my involvement.
Did you check?
I don't recall.
I see. When you refer to the Stage E, you refer to Stage E report. Do you mean Stage E or do you mean something else?
Sorry, I mean the employer's requirement, the tender set that we produced.
Right. Now, you also don't refer in this email to any emails that you had sent which asked Harley or Ryden for up-to-date details of the cladding design to send on to building control.
At this point, Harley were engaged in starting that process.
Did you go back to Harley at any point to say, well, look, we're now sending building control all this detailed information. Please give us your up-to-date designs as fast as you can?
No, but there was a meeting in which building control sat in with Harley in a workshop, one of the workshops, fairly early on. So they would have been aware of what was going on and how things were being procured.
Right. So just to be clear about this, when was the meeting, do you say, in which building control sat in with Harley in a workshop?
I think it was after one of the early DTMs, one or two. I can't be precise. I don't know.
Right. Is there a note of that meeting that... well, can I ask you first of all, were you at that meeting? Sorry.
Yes, I remember sitting.
You were there. And did you take a note of that meeting?
I might have done, but I can't find reference to it.
Right. Did you ever ask Harley to prepare a standalone cladding package for a submission to building control that contained all the relevant information?
No.
Do you accept that it was important to send building control accurate information so that they could do their job properly?
It was important for building control to understand what was being built so they could do their job properly.
Now, could you please go to your statement, paragraph 65 and 66, which you'll find on page 26. You say here at the top of page 26, paragraph 65, on the 22nd of August 2014, Kevin Lamb, Harley, emailed Simon Lawrence Ryden and stated he attached some preliminary drawings, and they're all listed there. In paragraph 66, excuse me, paragraph 66, you say, on the 26th of August 2014, I emailed Kevin Lamb, Harley, and Simon Lawrence Ryden and included some initial observations on the preliminary drawings. I referred to discussing them at a design team meeting the next day. The meeting didn't go ahead. On the 27th of August, I provided further comments and a markup on the preliminary drawings and said I would call Harley the next day to discuss the comments. I do not have a record of that call. And then 67, the Harley drawing register states that Harley issued copies of a number of drawings on the 29th of August. Now, what I'm interested in is do you agree with me that the drawings that you refer to at paragraph 65 and 66 represented the most up-to-date design of the cladding system as at the 24th of September, a month later, when you sent the list of drawings to John Hoban?
Sorry, what was the date I sent the drawings to John Hoban?
24th of September. We've seen the email. We can go back to it again if you like. It's
Yeah.
RYD.
No, that's fine. So, sorry, your question on this was?
Yes. So let's just take it in stages then. So I've shown you what you're saying in your statement.
Yep.
I've shown you the original email. So just to be clear, you provided the batch of drawings to RBKC on the 24th of September 2014, but a month before that, on the 22nd of August, you'd received some preliminary drawings from Kevin Lamb.
Yes.
And had made some initial observation on those.
Yes.
On the 26th and again on the 27th of August. My question is, do you agree that those drawings, including your comments, represented the most up-to-date
Yes.
design of the cladding system at that stage?
Yes.
Yes. But you didn't send them to the building control as part of your full plans application?
No, and the reason why I wouldn't is because they're preliminary drawings, and we used those drawings for the basis of the first meeting we had with building control. And that's when the whole issue, for example, of cavity barrier ratings came up and cavity barrier strategy. So those drawings, for example, didn't have the cavity barriers on them.
I see. And is there any reason why you didn't send those drawings as part of your 24th of September email?
They weren't ready to send.
I see. Is there, I don't think we see in that email anything from you to say to John Hoban, we are at the moment in the process of examining preliminary drawings from Harley in relation to the overcladding, and we'll send you those as soon as they're ready. We don't see that.
No.
Why is that? Why didn't you forewarn them that they were coming?
Because we had a sit-down workshop in which drawings were discussed.
Just to be clear in terms of dates, when was that workshop, as far as you can recall?
This problem, I think after one of the design team meetings, so it would have been, I don't know, September-ish, October-ish, something like this.
Right. Mr. Chairman, we're going to have a break. Can I just
Yes.
do one little tiny thing more?
Yes.
Or,
All right.
We'll round this off just a bit. Can I ask you to go to paragraph 44 of your statement, please?
Page 18.
And this is at page 18, where you deal with a number of meetings. You see that?
Yes.
And we can see the dates of some of them, and the most recent one before the 24th of September is the 23rd of September 2014, and you've got your notes of that meeting. And there's one on the 2nd of September. Looking at the list you've set out there, which is the meeting, do you think, at which you discussed the drawing with Harley? The Harley drawings with building control.
I need to go to the next page, is there?
Which of these three meetings?
Well, which of the meetings in around September time?
It's possible it could have been 44.3 or it could have been another one.
Right, okay.
Next page.
Okay. And to be fair to you, these meetings continue right through into 2015, but if you turn the page, we can see the next one over the page is February 2015. Do you think it was as late as that you discussed the Harley drawings with building control, or was it around September time?
There's definitely a meeting before Christmas. I mean, it precipitated the whole cavity barrier conversations, between 17th, 18th September and end of March. So it would have been round about September.
Very well. But, Mr. Chairman, we may need to pursue that after the break, but I think now
Yes. Is that a convenient point?
it will work well.
Yes. Well, we'll have a short break now, Mr. Crawford. Back at 3:20, please, if you
Okay.
would. Thank you. 20 past 3, please. Right, would you like to ask Mr. Crawford to come back, please? Yeah. God, they gossip all the time, this lot. Right, Mr. Crawford.
Yes.
Right.
Last lap with any luck. Good. Yes, Mr.
Yes. Mr. Crawford, can I ask you please to be shown RBK 000 at page 5. And now this is an accolade record from RBKC of a note of a meeting, and it's the third box down, plot 1, pre-start visit, 24th of November 2014. Officer John Hoban notes, meeting on site with myself, Paul Hanson, and various persons from the design team to go through their proposals with particular regard to the fire strategy for the scheme. See below. Okay. Now, note the date of that. Now, I should tell you that Mr. Hoban, in his witness statement, says that the main meeting with you happened on the 24th of November 2014, and that it was then that he was provided with initial drawings and details and discussed the work with, as he says, the architect. And that is a reference he makes to this note. Now, obviously, we will be asking him some questions about that when he comes to give evidence, but I want your take on this. You referred earlier on to a workshop when the Harley designs were discussed with John Hoban. Might it be as late as the 24th of November when you eventually discussed the Harley drawings with Mr. Hoban?
It's possible, but I don't think so, because the conversations around the cavity barriers were from around about September, and for sure some of that was prompted by the conversations with building control. So it's possible, but I just can't recall.
Right, okay. Now, we know that RBKC planners approved smoke silver ACM panels on the 25th of September 2014. If you want, I can give you a reference to that, but does that ring a bell with you?
Yes, there's a further submission to planning for a non-material amendment that went in afterwards, wasn't there, in relation to the window size?
Yes, but don't worry about that.
Yeah, sorry.
The approval of smoke silver ACM panels was clearly an important milestone in this project, wasn't it?
Yes, and sorry, what was the date you gave?
25th of September 2014.
Right.
Same day, ironically, as your meeting with Mr. Hoban. Studio E would need to update building control of the change from zinc to ACM, wouldn't it?
Yes, although I'd argue they're both essentially the same product.
Well, you may argue that, Mr. Crawford, but just to be clear, you are accepting, I think, by your yes in the last answer, that Studio E would need to update building control of the change from zinc to ACM. Do you agree with that proposition?
Yes.
Yes. And do you agree that you didn't do that?
No.
No. Why is that?
Because if I was aware of it, I would have.
Right. Now, by this stage, Studio E had, as you told us yesterday, in its possession a copy of the BBA certificate for the ACM panels.
Yes.
Yes? Do you agree that the BBA certificate for the ACM panels should have been sent on to building control?
Well, I'm not sure if they didn't have that already from conversations with Bruce and the development of the design earlier on.
Well, did you yourself take any steps to find out whether building control had the BBA certificate for the Rainier Bond?
I don't recall.
Now, we know that you forwarded the Xover OFSS, the Outline Fire Safety Strategy version 3, dated 7th November 2013, to John Hoban on the 29th of September 2014, because we have an email to that effect. We can look at that if you like. It's SEA 00000215. In fact, can I just go back a question? Can I just go back a question? Could you please be shown again? It's the document I think scampered over and I should have shown you. It's IBI 00001802. I just want to pick you up on the answer you gave a minute ago when you said you didn't send on to building control the update from zinc to ACM because you weren't aware of it. Can I just see if that's really right? If you go to that document, you see it there on the screen.
I didn't say because I wasn't aware of it, did I?
Well, what you said was because if I was aware of it,
If I was aware
I
of it.
would have. Well, can I just be clear? Maybe I've misunderstood. Were you aware that there had been a change from zinc to ACM by September 2014?
I mean, I think I would have understood that's what Harley were progressing their designs on.
Well, were you not aware by September 2015 that planning at RBKC had essentially approved smoke silver metallic ACM?
From this email, I was certainly copied into it, yes.
Yes. Given that, did you not think it was appropriate to update RBKC building control, which is not the same as planning, and tell them that instead of zinc, all information they had should show that the panels were ACM?
I may have done. I mean, we sat down, had meetings with them and discussed the scheme, so that was probably discussed in the meeting.
Can you recall yourself discussing it?
I don't have specific recollections, specific words said at specific times.
You forwarded the Xover Outline Fire Safety Strategy, version 3, 7th November 2013, to John Hoban on the 29th of September 2014. Now let's look at that. It's SEA 00000125, please. There it is. Was that in response to a request from John Hoban, or did you simply volunteer it?
I don't recall. I mean, it might have been off the back of one of the meetings, workshops on site. It's not clear to me.
Right. I'm not sure we have a record of any workshop or meeting on site.
Well, the ones I was alluding to earlier, I mean, we've had this discussion about potentially when we had a meeting, and I think it was around about the end of September.
Is there any reason why you didn't attach that document to the email below it in the chain on the 24th of September?
I don't recall. I mean, all I'd say is there's obviously, 4 days between them.
Yes.
Something may have prompted me to do that. I don't know. I can't recall.
Right. Well, we know that you met Mr. Hoban on site on the 25th of September,
Yeah.
which is after the 24th of September email, but before your 29th of September 2014 email to him.
Well, there you go. That's probably from the discussions that I had, and that it may have prompted me to then send it afterwards. It's very difficult to, I'm sure you appreciate, unpick these things from so long ago when you've only really got the emails to go on, which is only part of the story.
Yes, I mean, part of the problem, I think, Mr. Crawford, is that we don't have a full written record of each and every one of these meetings you tell us you attended. So I'm having to do my best with your recollection, your witness statement, and these emails, as you'll understand. Now, in your covering email, you say, please see attached the current Xover study, which was written prior to the fire strategy Rev B changes, and also attach the correspondence with Xover relating to the Rev B changes, which we will modify accordingly. Did you mean that you planned to modify the fire strategy?
I think that's yes. So there's this because we've been changing the layouts in the lower floors. I think we'd added a flat.
Right.
We'd got rid of the EMB office, estate manager's office. We'd reconfigured the ground floor, community room, and we'd added 2 flats. I think it was in the mezzanine level. It's to do with the internal changes.
I see.
Yeah.
So I see. We know that current Xover study, as you refer to it there, issue 3, 7th November 2013, didn't contain any B4 analysis of the facade, external fire spread. We went through that yesterday. You didn't flag here to building control that Xover was yet to update their analysis on B4 external fire spread, did you?
No.
Why was that?
Well, the cladding was still being developed at this stage. The detailed design of the cladding was still being developed by Harley.
Was it not important to you at the time to alert John Hoban to the fact that because the cladding was still being in development with Harley at an early stage perhaps, Xover would be asked in future to provide a final version of their OFSS, which did provide an analysis of external fire spread?
Not if we thought it was not a risk.
Did you think it wasn't a risk?
From what Xover had put in the report, no.
But we've seen it yesterday, and I don't want to go back over old ground, Mr. Crawford, but they said that the proposed changes, and I'm summarising, would not adversely affect compliance with B4, but that would be confirmed in a future analysis.
Well, okay, but...
You're telling us that, in fact, by this time, you weren't going to ask them to do a future analysis?
No, I didn't say that.
So what are you saying?
What I'm saying is that we were not alerted to any risks, and we weren't aware of any risks, and we didn't have any reason to believe there were any risks. And Harley were still developing their design at that point, so there's no reason for me to caveat everything in that fashion.
Coming back to it, was it not your intention, once Harley had completed their design work, to put it to Xover and ask them to perform the analysis that they said they would perform in relation to external fire spread?
Well, as you said, we did cover this yesterday, and you discussed the conversations and the emails that we had with Xover, and in that train of conversation, my understanding was that I think, as I recall, they intended to go and revisit it or complete the work, but I don't recall anything after that.
Right. Now, if we go, please, to SEA 0000231, this is John Hoban's sending you comments on the full plans application on the 18th of November. And I'm sorry, I should have told you, this is page 2, if you go to it. John Hoban, 18th November, to you, copy to Paul Hanson. And here is a raft of revisions to the preliminary scheme and his comments on it. You see that?
Yes.
And he says at the very start of the email, after the thank you, a decision notice will be forwarded to you shortly on the proposals submitted. Did you ever receive a decision notice?
I don't recall receiving it.
Did you ever chase for one?
I don't recall.
Now, it's right, isn't it, that a decision notice can contain conditions?
Yes.
and therefore would it not have been important to you to have the decision notice so that you knew what work had to be done and what conditions, if any, were to be imposed?
I don't think he could issue the decision notice till he'd satisfied himself that the scheme was in the right place.
Now, let's go to paragraph 219 of your statement, which is on page 69. You say there that I forwarded Building Control's comments on submission 1 to Terry Ashton on the 20th of November. You see that? And you refer to an email, and you set out in detail the contents of that covering email.
Yes.
And you say, we can take it from your statement, you say, I'm due to meet with them on Monday, etc. On the Academy project, we had the situation where Tony Pearson managed to argue some of their comments away. Just pausing there, Tony Pearson is Xover, isn't he?
Yes.
I see. If you had any observations, particularly where you think their comments may be excessive, I'd be grateful to know, as I can take these with me to the meeting on Monday. Is it fair to say that you did not yourself consider those comments? You just passed them on?
I think that's a little unfair.
Well, what would be fair?
Well, I'm asking Terry Ashton from Xover as an authority on fire regulations based on his expert knowledge and insight to comment accordingly.
So is it that you didn't feel sufficiently competent to comment on fire matters?
No, that's not what I said.
You don't think that's fair?
I think that's very unfair.
I think that's very unfair.
Yeah.
Can I ask you whether you actually did yourself have any input into Building Control's comments and what went to Terry Ashton?
Without actually seeing them, I can't even remember precisely what they were. So I'd need to see those comments to make.
Right, well, perhaps just look at the email. I don't want you to think that I'm asking you an unfair question. If you go to the email, it's SEA 000-12189. It's the email you refer to yourself in the paragraph in the statement. And it is as set out, top of the page. It's from you to Terry Ashton, and you say, Terry, I've received these markups from Building Control regarding the fire strategy.
Yes.
I mean, take time to look at all of them if you like, but it looks from that short email you sent to Mr. Ashton that you were simply passing those comments on to Mr. Ashton.
Yes, but I can't see the comments. Where are the comments?
Well, the comments are in the email below, in John Hoburn's email to you,
Okay,
and
so-
also in the attachments there. I know.
Yes, so this is what I'm saying. Unless I can see these comments, given the accusation you've made, I'd like...
I'm not making any accusation.
Sorry, okay.
I'm not making any accusation. I'm asking for your comments. Crawford, I'll keep going on this because it'll take me some time to dig out those precise comments. But I was actually referring to the comments in the email itself below.
Yes,
if you,
but
if
with
you
all
want to
due-
be shown those comments, I'm very happy to spend time digging around to find them if we can.
With all due respect, these comments have been... I remember how the comments were made. They were made as markups on the drawings, so there's a lot of comments. Some of those comments may have been obvious to me, some of them may not.
All right.
But bearing in mind that they related to the fire strategy, which Xover produced, it's only right that Xover saw those comments and commented on them in relation to their fire strategy, if you see what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
yes, I would have looked at them and formed my own opinion on some of them, but it's also highly important that Xover saw them, given that they related to the fire strategy and potentially any changes to that
I
strategy.
understand that. But perhaps I can take this more shortly rather than grubbing about trying to find the documents. Do you remember receiving these attachments from John Hoburn, which are the markups, and adding to those before you sent them on to Xover?
Adding to them, I wouldn't necessarily add to them. I'd look through the comments,
Right.
try and understand them,
Yes.
make my own assessment of them, send them on to Xover to get their take on them. For example, things like the the ventilated lobbies. It's definitely difference of interpretation sometimes in what size ventilated lobbies should be. 1 square metre, 0.4 square metre, and so on, different scenarios. So it was only right, bearing in mind that they had a relevance to the high level or outline fire strategy, that Xover were able to see them and comment on them. I mean, they're effectively comments on their high level strategy. I mean, generally when you produce the fire strategy for any building, the fire specialist would produce the actual strategy as a document, but the architect would do the drawings, and they'd do them in tandem with the fire consultant. So, for example, you do drawings, they'd mark them up, but usually the architect does the fire strategy drawings, but they're always read in conjunction with the fire strategy itself, or at least that's my experience.
Right. Now, let's move on in time. Can I ask you to go, please, to paragraph 230 of your statement, which is at page 71 of that document. You say, on the 6th of March 2015, I emailed Building Control regarding the fire rating to allow for within the cladding at the lines between apartments, stating where we are overcladding, what fire rating do we need to allow for within the wall build-up between apartments. Now, that is an email that you will recall from this morning.
Yes.
You then go on to say, and we didn't focus on this morning, I attached Harley drawings, and you list them all there.
Yes.
And then you say, I note by the combination of Harley drawings and C1059 Rev A, Building Control could have been aware of a number of the materials proposed for the overcladding system. We've been through those already, but my question here is, apart from these drawings, did you send any more Harley drawings to Building Control?
No, but we sat with Building Control and discussed the drawings, including the specification, with them at workshop. And they took drawings away from these workshops.
I see. So
I'm also not sure whether... well, I know Harley met Building Control separately.
Right, so this is back to where we were this morning, and the same evidence you've given in relation to these workshops.
Yeah.
Do you know if Harley ever sent drawings of the cladding system to RBKC directly?
I know they had meetings with RBKC Building Control. Whether they handed them stuff in those meetings or sent them directly, I couldn't say.
Would you agree with this proposition, that if Building Control didn't have full materials of what was to be used in the cladding system, didn't have full details of the location of cavity barriers, and didn't have full details of the crown design, if all those three things are the case, then RBKC Building Control would not have been provided with sufficient information for the purposes of being able to progress the full plans application?
If they didn't have that information.
I'm now going to turn to a meeting in April 2015. Can I ask you to look on in your statement, please, to page 75, at paragraph 245. You say there, in a meeting which I believe took place in April 2015, possibly the client design sign-off meeting on 30th of April 2015, I recall being told by Simon Lawrence, Ryden, something along the lines of that there was no need to ask any more questions as the cladding has been signed off by Building Control. See that?
Yes.
Is that just is that a recollection that you have or had when you signed this statement, or did you refresh your memory from a document?
I think that's a recollection, and it comes back to the fact that, and again this relates to the September session of emails on the cavity barriers, and then the March session,
yeah.
And there's a series of workshops taking place, or informal meetings taking place with Building Control and Harley, not always the two together, by the time we got to, I think it was end of March, start of April, we agreed the cavity barrier strategy, and we'd also talked through the whole cladding scheme.
I see. Right. Now, this conversation, I think, as you have just alluded to, followed some queries that had arisen in relation to cavity barriers or fire stopping in March 2015. And we've seen, I think, that Building Control's final position on that subject matter was to agree with the positioning of the cavity barriers in the drawing you sent Mr. Hoban when you said we're all miffed. You remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for the record, that's SEA 000136061 for the record. No need to look at it. But it's right, isn't it? And here's the question, that Building Control had not expressly signed off on the cladding as a whole at that time, had they?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
No. Did you take Mr. Lawrence's statement to you as you've recalled it, that there was no need to ask any more questions of Building Control because I'm sorry, let me start the question again. Did you understand Mr. Lawrence's statement to you that there was no need to ask any more questions? Did you take that as an instruction to you by Ryden to stop querying any matters about cladding with Building Control?
I think there'd been quite a series of meetings and correspondence, and perhaps Simon was frustrated that the process was not complete, and then he just wanted to get the stuff constructed and up.
Right. Did it trouble you that Simon Lawrence was telling you that the cladding had been signed off by Building Control?
Not necessarily, because I think, as I mentioned, I know the cladding contractor had met Building Control, or at least it inferred that they'd met Building Control probably with Ryden when I wasn't there, for example. So there's a whole series of informal meetings going on site, and we were not always party to that information because the nature of how we were appointed and how we were being used as a consultant was that we were contacted as and when we were needed. So I was aware of things. Obviously, I'm only on site when I'm asked to attend a meeting, but there's a whole load of other meetings and other things going on that I'm not party to, and this came off the back of that, I think.
Did you ask Simon Lawrence to clarify or confirm when and by what means Building Control had signed off on the cladding?
No, I think I'd probably changed that phrase. He said something that had been effectively signed off. I mean, I don't think he said categorically signed off.
You do, to be fair to you, say something along the lines of, so you've given us the gist.
Yeah.
I take that entirely, but my question again, did you actually ask Simon Lawrence to confirm to you when and by whom Building Control had effectively signed off the cladding?
I don't recall doing that, no.
Did you think to ask John Hoban? Did you go back to John Hoban and ask him to confirm what Simon Lawrence was saying?
I don't recall doing that, no.
No. Did you ask him for a document? Presumably not. Confirming what Simon Lawrence had told you?
No.
When you heard the gist of what you say Simon Lawrence told you in April 2015, perhaps at the end of that month, were you not concerned that Building Control had effectively signed off on the cladding when Xover had not yet updated their B4 external spread of fire analysis?
No.
Why is that?
I understood there to be no risk from the conversations I'd had with Xover, and it wouldn't have dawned on me to do that. I mean, I didn't see why I would have.
You'd understood there to be no risk from the conversations you'd had with Xover. When was the last conversation that you can recall that you'd had with Xover prior to April 2015, when they told you or gave you the impression that the cladding system presented no risk in respect of external fire spread?
It's probably been the end of March conversations.
End of March conversations. Do you remember speaking to it would be Mr. Ashton, would it, that you spoke to about that?
Each one we were discussing the cavity barrier strategy in relation to the build-up
Yeah.
insulation. And so on.
Certainly, Mr. Crawford, and we've seen the emails about that, but I just want to be very clear, and I'm sorry to keep revisiting this question of Xover's promised future analysis. Are you saying that you had a conversation with Mr. Ashton in late March, perhaps in the context of the cavity barrier debate that was going on? Are you saying that you had a conversation in which he told you that the cladding system for Grenfell Tower presented no risk in terms of external fire spread?
I think that's what Xover have said all the way through.
But we've seen the report in which they said that it would be confirmed in a future analysis in a report. Are you saying that you had a later conversation in which Xover told you that no such report was necessary?
They didn't say that.
So what did they say?
Everything I've said up to now.
Well, that's quite a lot, Mr. Crawford. Let's be precise. What do you recall Xover told you about the need for a future analysis, which in their third issue of their 7th of November 2013 report said would be provided in the future?
Okay, I think I mentioned this earlier this morning, but I believe in the conversation I had in relation to the cavity barriers, they alluded to the fact that they might have to go back and complete it at some point. Again, this is just vague recollection from conversations. But after that, I don't recall anything. And my understanding was that they presented an opinion that what we were doing was acceptable. Therefore, potentially, there wasn't even a need for them to do a further report.
Were you not concerned that building control had effectively signed off on the cladding when, so far as you knew, building control had not been given any detail about the insulation product that was going to be used in the cladding system?
But they had the insulation product. They knew what the insulation product was.
How did they know that?
We discussed it, and we discussed the spec in meetings.
I see. Now, brief question on Regulation 38, which I showed you earlier. Before the building control completion certificate was issued, were you ever asked to provide any drawings or information to the TMO for the purposes of Regulation 38?
No.
No. Were you aware of any Regulation 38 fire safety information being provided to the TMO by the rest of the design team?
No.
Did John Hoban ever ask you to confirm that Regulation 38 had been complied with?
I don't recall that, no.
Right. Now, at paragraph... Excuse me a moment. At paragraph, 118 of your statement, page 58, let's just look at that. You say at paragraph 181, and this is under the heading Building Regulations and Associated Guidelines, I considered that the tower did comply with the relevant building regulations because, as I set out in further detail below, 1, I do not recall being contacted by Ryden or Building Control to provide any further information to Building Control after Building Control's feedback on submission 2 in January 2016. You see that?
Yes.
Now, you give no other reason there, just your reliance on anything back from Ryden or Building Control. Is that right?
Yes.
Does that mean that you didn't undertake your own independent check of the design against the building regulations?
It was, we weren't contracted to check. We were contracted to seek to comply with building regulations.
Well, that's your understanding of the contract, I think
Yeah.
you told us on the first day.
Yeah.
In the light of the information that we've been through and the gaps in the information, do you accept that it wasn't reasonable of you to rely on building control when you hadn't provided them with a full cladding package of information and were relying on other people to do that?
I understood that they did have all the necessary information and it was not contacted contrary to that. I mean, if they signed it off and they didn't, what were they signing off? They'd done site visits, they'd had meetings, they'd had drawings, they knew what was being built. So what were they signing off?
Two final questions on building control, if I may. First of all, do you remember, doing the best you can sitting here, whether there was ever a meeting with John Hoban where the route to compliance with ADB, paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 was ever discussed?
I don't recall.
Now, you said on day 9, the first day of your evidence, that Harley confirmed compliance of the cladding with the building regulations to building control. Do you remember yourself that happening?
Can you read that out again?
Yes, you said that on day 9, the first day of your evidence, that Harley had assured building control that the cladding was compliant with the building regulations. If we can look at it if you like. Do you want to look at it? It's day.
No, I don't need to look at it.
Let's look at it then. It's day 9, page 113. I wonder if that could be got up. Day 9, page 113.
I don't need to look at it, sorry. But if you want to look at it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
What I was saying is I don't need to look at it.
Oh, you don't need to
but
look at it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So my question is, do you remember when that happened?
Sorry, because I'm just getting a bit tired. Can you restate the whole question? And
Yes, of course. The gist of your evidence, which I was going to show you, was that Harley had confirmed compliance of the cladding system with the building regulations, and they confirmed that to building control. Do you know when they did that?
when?
Yes.
Not specifically, but I remember being in a meeting with Harley and building control discussing the whole scheme.
Right. And who was it, do you remember, at Harley who confirmed that?
Specifically, I can't remember. I mean, typically those meetings were Ben Ray Bailey and or Kevin Lamb.
And who at building control was that confirmation given to the best of your recollection?
It would have been John, almost certain.
And was it done orally, or was there a written document which recorded that?
I don't recall. I'm certainly not aware of a written document.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm conscious that this witness is getting quite tired, but
Well, he's been giving evidence for a long time.
he has.
Yeah.
Yes. I wonder whether I've got a few more questions to go, but I'm conscious of the time. It may be worth a very short break, and I will endeavour to finish by 4:30 or so.
Well, it's the or so that worries me.
Oh, it always. I know. Yes, I know. I know. Well,
I would like
we
to
could
give
power
him
through.
a break, but I think it would help him.
Yes.
But
Well,
we need to try and finish him within reasonable time.
Yeah, best endeavours. Reasonable endeavours. Indeed, Mr. Chairman, I think a short break.
All endeavours.
All
Yeah,
endeavours.
all right. Mr. Crawford, we'll have a break. 4:10, please.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Right. 4:10, please. Thank you. Yes, would you ask Mr. Crawford to come back, please? Right, Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Good. Yes. Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crawford, I'm going to ask you one or two questions now about the technical review that took place on the 28th of October 2015. If we could please have the record of that. It's at SEA 000135008. Can we please have that up on the screen? Now, you can see here that you are involved in it. It's dated the 28th, the meeting is the 28th of October, issued 29th of October, and the assessor is Bruce Soanes, associate, and the project architect is Neil Crawford, that's you.
Yes.
And there's a long list of things that are done. Did you take part in any other technical review other than this one
Not that I recall.
on this project? Right. To the best of your knowledge, so this was the first and only technical review to have taken place. Is that right?
Yes.
At this time, October 2015, do you remember that the work was to the external facade was some 60% complete?
Not specifically that number, but I'd have known it was well advanced.
Yes. And Mr. Cushell says in his statement, and we can look at it if you need to, but he says that a technical review usually occurs at what was previously RIBA stage E/F, technical design and production information. Do you agree with him?
Yes.
Yes. And if this was the first technical review, it's fair to say, isn't it, that it had been carried out really woefully late?
What I would say is that although this is the first formal technical review, we were discussing, and I was discussing with Bruce way before this, the technical aspects of the building.
Do you know why the technical review wasn't carried out until late October 2015?
I think the formal review was, I think there'd been a lot of items that were, the project had been delayed massively from start to finish. So for all sorts of reasons, most of them out with our control, all of them out with our control. So the work had been carried out sporadically. The project had started and stopped and started. And so, although we'd reviewed internally and informally, I think there'd probably been a recognition at that point from management, we should do a formal technical review, and therefore that's what this was.
Are there any records, notes, minutes of the internal informal reviews that you've just referred to?
Not that I'm aware of.
Look at page 2, please, of this document, under the heading Project Documents. And you can see there at the second item there, Building Regulations Assessment, and there's a comment, building control sign-off drawings have been issued and incrementally signed off, agreed on site. Is that right? Is that actually correct, that there were sign-offs of drawings by building control?
Building control asked for things and we gave them and they were satisfied with them.
Right.
And for example, there's emails on cavity barriers that were sent where John says, yes, he's satisfied this meets B2, B3 and so on.
Yes, we've seen all the emails. I'm interested in the comment, building control sign-off drawings have been issued and incrementally signed off, stroke agreed on site. Can I just ask you, who actually wrote this document? Was it you or was it Mr. Soanes?
I'm not sure, probably Mr. Soanes.
Right. Did Mr. Soanes ever get involved in building controls, sign-off of drawings or site meetings?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. So where it says building control sign-off drawings have been issued, etc., that would have come from you to him and he would have recorded it?
It would have been within our general discussion, yeah.
Yes, I see. But the impression given by what he's written there, building control sign-off drawings have been issued, rather suggests that there was a document which building control had issued in which it had signed off, in other words, approved, okayed, specific drawings.
No, I think that's a general statement that encompasses what we understood had happened.
Right. So in fact, rather than there being sign-off of it being issued, it is what you're saying here, or is what is being said here, is that building control had indicated approval on drawings.
And aspects generally, I mean, they were visiting site, and for example, they would look at the stairs and accept that what they saw was acceptable in terms of their interpretation of the building regs, for example.
Right.
With us not always there.
And if I asked you the question, when was that and who was it, would you say this was during these workshops that you kept having? Is that right?
No, I mentioned there specifically stairs because, as mentioned in my witness statement, there were site visits that building control were doing in conjunction with Dryden.
Are you able to point to any document in which you can say that building control signed off specific drawings?
That'd be a question for building control.
No, I'm asking you, because you were the one who told Mr. Soanes that building control had signed off drawings, and that sign-off drawings had been issued and incrementally signed off, agreed on site. So my question again, please,
Well,
for you.
I think that terminology is a general understanding of what went on.
Right. So is the answer to the question I've just asked you, which I'd like you to answer, I'll ask it again, are you able to point to any document in which you can say building control signed off specific drawings?
Not a document, no.
No. Moving to the bottom of that page, please, the technical review design standards says, comment, designed to current housing, approved document, building regulations and British standards where applicable. On what basis could you reach that conclusion?
Well, Bruce and I have been, well, Bruce obviously has a long history with the project, and then myself towards the end. During that period, particularly during the design stage, early design stage, there were a number of meetings with building control, and also Bruce was working up the plans and the layouts in relation to all those standards listed there. And obviously the final assessment and sign off of the building acknowledged that they were, in the eyes of building control, were compliant. But that's a statement of fact. I mean, they were designed to current housing approved document, building regulations and building standards where applicable. I mean, that is the basis on which the building was designed.
If we look at page 3 then, please, technical performance. Under that heading, we can see fire detailing. You can see that, just below halfway down that page. Comment completed. You see that?
Yes.
What does that comment relate to?
Fire strategy.
Does it include or relate to the external facade of the building?
I think it's a general comment, so it relates to fire strategy.
Was the detailing of the cavity barriers by this stage, October 15, complete?
October 15, yes.
I'm going to ask you one or two questions about the CDM and O&M manual. We've already discussed, I think, your understanding in brief, and it was brief, of Studio E's obligations under the CDM regulations. In terms of design risk assessment, we know that Studio E did carry out a design risk assessment, and we've seen the email of that. Just for the transcript for later reference, it's SEA 00009350, and there's no need to turn it up.
Yes, we carried out risks and latent risk assessments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Just going back in time to your handover with Mr. Soanes, did you discuss with him in your handover the risk assessment, which I think predated your involvement in the project?
I can say definitively.
Right. Were you ever asked to update it?
I certainly read it. If I felt there was something relevant to be updated in it, I would have updated it.
Okay. Can I ask you to go to SEA 00013756, please? And this is a handwritten note of yours on the 16th of December 2015. You see that?
Yes.
10 a.m. BC sign-off, that's building control sign-off. And then 2 items under that, O and M. You see that?
Yes.
Can you remember what that related to?
What, the O&M?
Yes.
Operation and Maintenance Manual?
Yes. So what was discussed at that general site meeting on that day about O&M? Do you remember?
I don't recall specifically, but I suspect the fact that that they were looking to assemble them or prepare them.
Right, I see. Were you involved in the preparation of the O&M manual, the Operation and Maintenance Manual?
No, although we were asked very late on to provide as-built drawings.
Right. Do you know who was primarily responsible, or who, I should say, took primary responsibility for the compilation of the O&M manual?
I believe someone was contracted to write it, someone by Ryden, but I can't remember precisely who it was, or whether it was internally by Ryden.
Were you ever asked to provide information for the health and safety file for the building?
I don't recall.
Now, can I ask you, please, to look, returning to a different topic, can I ask you to look, please, at EXO 0000197? This is an email from you in relation to Ben Rogerson of the 5th of November at 14:32 and others, including Mr. Soanes. And it's the second email down on the page. And it's the subject is Grenfell Tower Fire Strategy. And it says, Ben, can you help with the query below from Colin Charles at Leadbitter? As I understand, Colin has been challenged by one of the residents that the current redesign of the landscape surrounding Grenfell Tower comprises the fire access to Grenfell Tower. And then you say this, the individual concerned is a known troublemaker. You see that?
Yes.
And this is what you send to Ben Rogerson. And Ben sends that on to Terry Ashton at Xover at the top. I don't think you need to worry about that. The question I have is about your reference there to a known troublemaker. How did you know that the resident in question was a known troublemaker?
If I'm being honest, I can't even remember writing this email, but it's dated...
It's dated the 5th of November 2012.
Who was Ben Rogerson? Sorry, because there's no email address. And
No, there isn't. Well, if you can't remember, I'm not sure I can assist you. Maybe I could assist you, but I'm not sure we have time for me to assist you necessarily, but I'm not sure it matters. My question is really whether you can remember how you discovered that the individual that you're talking about, the resident, was a, quotes, known troublemaker.
I'm not sure, maybe it was problems we had in terms of trying to agree the landscape in relation to calc. I mean, that's only...
Why did you feel it necessary to draw to Mr. Rogerson's attention that the individual who had made the challenge was, quotes, a known troublemaker, unquotes?
To be honest, I'm struggling to remember the context of this.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the suggestion that might be made is that you were putting the words in brackets, the individual concerned is a known troublemaker, into the email because you wanted to diminish the importance of the challenge that had been raised by that resident. Is that fair?
Let me read the whole email.
Yes, please do.
I'm just trying to understand the context here. I think it's just trying to clarify the situation relative to the firefighting access requirement, and that the landscaping proposals weren't inhibiting in that.
Right. Just so you know, we've discovered Ben Rogerson is actually a senior consultant at Xover.
Right.
So my question, just once more, so we're clear about it, were you referring to the individual concerned as a known troublemaker in order to diminish the importance of the complaint?
I wouldn't have thought so, no.
Right. What was the purpose of the words in brackets?
I must have believed that at the time.
How did you get that information?
This is 8 years ago. I don't even know to whom it refers.
All right.
I mean, the issue really is the gist of this email is trying to establish whether anything's been compromised in terms of fire strategy, which clearly I don't think it was.
Well, Mr. Crawford, we've come
All right,
to the end of your evidence, and I'm grateful to you. I have just one more question for you, and it's one you may have heard me ask some people before who have had a significant responsibility for areas of the project. And it's this: looking back on it now and your role in the project from the summer of 2014, and looking at the material that we've spent time looking at over the past few days, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I think I'd have designed the building to a different set of regulations, more in line with what has been implemented in 2019, although arguably that doesn't go far enough. But clearly the risks of the current regulations at the time the building was built were known. Were known by government, for example. If you look at select committee information from as early as 1999, you can see that the warnings were there about the risk of fire and combustible materials in buildings. And I think the reality is that the building regs aren't fit for purpose, and they've led to the regularization of usage of dangerous and flammable materials. And unfortunately, the industry only reacts to the regulations that are in place. Therefore, you need to have regulations in place that are fit for purpose. And unfortunately, despite when you think of those, there must have been awareness. There wasn't awareness as far back as then, because you can see it in the select committee report. Then why wasn't it acted on? It was in Scotland. And so yeah.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my questions for Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford, thank you very much for your patience over the last 3 days.
Thanks.
Well, Mr. Crawford, I'd like to thank you for coming to give your evidence. I'm sure it hasn't been an easy exercise to undertake, and I'm sorry that it went on as long as it did, but as you realise, there are lots of things we had to ask you.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming. You're now free to go.
Can I just add another bit on that last statement? I think one of the implications of that system, the regulatory system, in the specific mistake that I think that was made is in B4, when you look at the classification of having the national class 0 was a mistake, and having it beside the European class. I mean, if you just had A2 as you have now, effectively, then you wouldn't have had the situation where you could have put that panel on the building. And not only that, you wouldn't have the situation where you had the panel, which the problem was definitely compounded by the fact that the panel was allowed to be retested, and then those results not disclosed, because effectively it was still compliant under national class 0, and this is a contradiction, and this is also, in my view, led to the fire. Sorry, that's it. I didn't mean to. I meant to say
Right.
that at the same time. So.
Well, thank you again, and if you'd like to go with the usher, she'll look after you. And don't leave your coat behind. Right, so that's it for today,
It is it for today, Mr. Chairman.
and tomorrow we're going to hear from another one of the architects.
We will hear from Mr. Reck first thing tomorrow morning.
So we'll break there and resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow, when we'll hear, as Mr. Millett said, from Mr. Reck, who is also one of the architects at Studio E. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please. Thank you.